Welcome to our fourth installment of Power Parsha, and it's getting some good reviews and hopefully picking up some steam. This week we're going to talk a little bit about Parshat Chayei, 2 points from Parshat Chayei, the fourth Parsha in the Torah. And the Parsha opens with the death of Sarah, interestingly enough, and the first verse of this week's Torah portion is Vayu Chayei Sarah. And the life of Sarah her days were, Me'al Shana, 100 years, Esrim Shana, 20 years, Sheva Shana, and 7 years, Shnei Chayei Sarah, these were the days of the life of Sarah. So her life is recorded, her years are recorded as 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. Right? So it would seem like we're going to go with the biggest number. Right, so she lived 100. The Torah didn't tell us she lived 127 years, like it might say in other instances. It says 100 years, 20 years, 7 years, and then it says these are the days of her. These are the years of her life. So it's repetitive, and we know the Torah it doesn't like to be redundant, doesn't like to add any extra verbiage. It gets to the point. So why would, and rabbis have been, rectifying that sin of the Bible ever since. It was a joke, okay. But why does the Torah tell it to us as 100 years, 20 years, 7 years? So seemingly it would mean we're going to start with the biggest block, 100 years, and then tack on top of the 100 years of her life another 20 years, and on top of that an additional 7. But Rashi has a different thing. Rashi says, why is it separated? Because it teaches us something, that when she was 100, she was without sin like when she was 20. When she was 20, she was as beautiful as she was when she was 7. And so Rashi kind of implies that it was written in the reverse. So the 100 is like the 20, and the 20 is like the 7. So that's curious. And then Rashi, again, noting on the commenting on this redundancy at the end, these are the days of her life. So Rashi comments and says all the days of her life were equally good. In other words, after we segregate the 100, 20, and 7, and the reason to do that is to compare the 100 to the 20 and the 20 to the 7, which really is sort of going backwards, right? 100 to 20, 20 back to 7. But in addition to that, does the Torah then include all the years of her life together in one statement? Because all the years of her life were equally good. So the obvious question on that is, if you've been paying attention in last week's Torah portion, Sarah's life was not at all very good. In fact, it was mostly really bad. She was dealt with religious persecution most of her life. She was barren, didn't have a child. Then she finds out, in fact, the Torah tells us that, the Midrash tells us that she passes away unexpectedly because of the shock and the trauma of the news that Isaac was brought as a sacrifice on the altar, and then that his life was spared, and that was too much for her to handle. So this is a woman who dealt with a lot. She had to deal with competing power structure within her family and her marriage. There's a lot going on that she had to deal with. So her life was not, most of her life actually was pretty not good. Maybe it turned out in the end to be okay, even though she dies in a sense under tragic circumstances as well. But how do you make that statement? So the truth is like this, that there's the age-old question that people have been asking a lot also lately, right? Which is, why do bad things seem to happen to good people? Why do the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper? And that's obviously a very pertinent question now as well. The truth is that it's not a new question. It's been asked by our greats going all the way back, really even to Abraham. But we know famously this question was asked by Moses. When Moses asks God, essentially he says, I want you to show me your ways. Tell me what's going on. Why is it that the world seems lopsided? It seems that you punish the righteous and reward the wicked. What's going on? So what does God say to him? God says to him, I can't tell you everything, but I'm going to pass. I'm going to put you in a cleft of a rock, and I'm going to pass over you. You're not going to see my face. You're going to see my back. Right? You will see my back. You won't see my face. But there's an interesting take on that statement. And that is that when God says, you'll see my back and not my face, he was actually explaining something to Moses. He was saying, look, Moses, you want to be forward facing. You want to look into the future. You see that people are struggling now, and you want to see how good it is, how it's really good, how I'm really just. You're not going to be able to see. Forward, you're not going to be able to gain that insight. But when you look back, Like they say, hindsight is 20/20. Right? When you look back, you'll be able to see the trials and challenges that you went through in your life, that you endured and you overcame, how that was all really for the good. So you'll see my back. You'll see, looking back, you'll be able to reflect on the goodness. But as you're going through it and you're moving forward, that you're not going to be able to see. What do you need there? There you need faith. When we're looking forward into a current circumstance and challenge and situation, you don't see God's ways. You don't know what exactly is going on. And it's dark and it's hard to see. And here that requires a lot of faith. There's a story in the Talmud about Nebuchadnezzar, who was a king, a Babylonian king who conquered Jerusalem and dispersed the Jewish people. And there's a story told in the Talmud about when he had thrown Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, three of the last prophets, into a furnace. And it says that the whole story of it is not relevant. Now, the point is that he wants to start singing God's praises. And the Talmud actually says there that had he started singing God's praises, he was attempting to sing even sweeter songs to God than King David, who's the sweet serenader of Israel, right? King David, who gives us the book of Psalms. And so that's what he was attempting to do. But at that time, Torah tells us that the Talmud tells us that he was smacked across the face by an angel. So one of the commentaries explained what was it? Why was he smacked across the face? And that stopped him. That shut him up. He didn't end up praising God. So he said, when he says, you're a big man, Mr. Nebuchadnezzar. You got your crown on your head. Things seem to be going swimmingly for you, and now you want to start singing God's praises in a very comfortable position. Yeah, what if I slapped you across the face and reprimanded you a little bit, chopped you down to size a little bit, and suddenly you face a little challenge? Could you still sing God's praises even there? And there he was unable to. That closed his mouth. He wasn't able to sing God's praises. This idea to be able to bless God not only for the good, but also in the bad times and for the bad, that's a uniquely Jewish trait. And there's incredible news last week out of Israel, right? We know this, the Israeli soldier Ori Magidish, who was rescued, right? She had been taken hostage. She was rescued. Before she had been rescued, there were videos going around. I remember seeing them on WhatsApp, not really having no context, knowing what was going on before news broke that she was rescued. There was they brought a Torah into her room in her house, and there's a video of her mother taking challah, something that we did here in the community last week. The women in the community did. And her mother was doing the mitzvah of separating challah. And it's very, very emotional, very interesting. You watch it, you see it. It's very noteworthy. But the following day or the following week, last week exactly, there was a woman, a member of the Knesset in Israel, Galit Distel Atbaryan, who got up on the Knesset floor and spoke about that video of Margalit Magidish, or Ori's mother, separating challah. And she says, very beautiful, whatever, the whole thing, but there's one thing she says that caught my attention. And that was that in the midst of all this, she calls out this mom whose daughter is being held captive and is praying emotionally and crying for her to be returned, screams out in the middle of this, her heartfelt prayer coming from the depth of her heart, she screams, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ani ohevet otcha. God, I love you. And so she goes on to talk about this and the faith and so on and so forth. Point I want to make here, because we're short on time, is that we see this is actually something that the Jewish woman inherits from Sarah, our matriarch. This idea that Sarah was able to look at her life and see the good in everything that happens at every stage of her life, so that every day of her life was good. Everything that happened in her life to her was good, finding God in that, finding closest to God, a connection to God, deepening her love in God with everything. The rest of us, the Torah tells us, look backwards. At the end of her life, you see 120 to 7, look backwards, you'll see, if you look backwards, like we said before, God says, you'll see, look back, you'll see how all of those years of her life were actually good. But Sarah was the one who taught us, showed us the way to be able to have that faith, and even while we're moving forward in the midst of darkness, to be able to find that faith and that trust in God. And we'll just finish with another point on another aspect of the Torah portion, because it's the Torah portion where it is a celebration, in a sense, of the life of Sarah. And really, most of the Torah portion is talking about her son Isaac. And like the saying doesn't go, like mother, like son, right? So Isaac, Yitzchak, the second of our patriarchs, and Sarah's son, and only son, it shows something similar in this week's Torah portion. In fact, Isaac is the one who establishes the prayer of Mincha. Mincha is the afternoon prayer. We find it from a verse in this week's Torah portion as Rebecca is being brought to Isaac for marriage, and it says that Isaac goes out into the field before evening to pray. So the close reading of that verse suggests that he was praying Mincha. What was going on here? What's special about mincha? Why is it that Isaac specifically is the one who establishes the mincha prayer in the afternoon? And why does the Torah tell us that he goes out to pray in the field? What was going on? So there's something very unique about mincha, which is you wake up in the morning and you're refreshed, you're rejuvenated from a good night's sleep, and you haven't started your day, and your mind is still a little clear, hopefully, and fresh. And you get up, you put on your tefillin, you pray. You can pray at night after your day. Either it was good, it was bad, or whatever, however your day went. But it's behind you already. The day is behind you, and so you can pray again find a little calm before going to bed at night. Mincha is smack in the middle of your day. Mincha, you've got to stop what you're doing. You're middle of your workflow. You're jumping from one meeting to another, and here you have to stop what you're doing to pray to God, which represents this idea of finding God even in that. That's why what's so special about mincha. Mincha is, in a sense, it's the shortest prayer on the one hand, but it's also the hardest one to focus on because you've got a million things going through your mind during that time period. And yet to be able to pause, stop, and find something even more important than whatever it is that you're doing and, as you go about your day, to be able to focus on praying to God, connecting with God, that's something that's very special about mincha. And that's where you find light, even in that darkness, the darkness of the day, meaning where you're feeling disconnected, you're feeling scattered, or you're not necessarily feeling particularly connected to God, to pause and be able to refocus and recalibrate. That's something that's very special about mincha. That's something Yitzchak does. And that's why the Torah tells us, where was he doing this before evening? He was doing it out in the field, because the field represents the office. Back in the day, the field was the office, right? Had the Torah been written nowadays, it would have said, while he was at WeWork or whatever, in middle on the office floor. That was where all the work was done, was in the field. So to stop in the middle of your work day, in the field, where you're busy trying to make a living, trying to earn ends meet, to stop there and to pray, that's something that's very unique. Represents also this idea of great faith in God, right? Because you're thinking, to make a living, I've got to go from one meeting to another, I've got to do this, I've got to be productive, stopping to pray seems to be a distraction. And we'll finish with a story that illustrates this point. One of my favorite stories about from a great storyteller, Velvel Green, who was a professor and a microbiologist and scientist who worked for NASA and other government agencies in the 60s and 70s and in Minnesota. And there was a Rabbi Moshe Feller, also a local from Minnesota, who was the Chabad rabbi sent to Minnesota, and he tried to get himself a meeting with this Velvel Green. And the Velvel Green, was working in a high security clearance environment in the government, was very busy. It was getting into that office area required a lot of clearance to be able to get in there. And he kept saying, Rabbi, you're not going to be able to get in, you can't get the clearance. Just, I'll send you a check, whatever you want. You assume the rabbi in Minnesota with a black hat and a beard probably was just after a check. The rabbi says, I need to speak to you about something very urgent, very important. It's not about the money. I want to get a meeting. Anyway, somehow he schedules a meeting. He comes in to meet with him finally, and Velvel Green talks about how he sees this short, diminutive rabbi in his black hat and his beard walking, surrounded by these two large guards with big guns, walking him into this, military security office area. And he kind of felt bad for the rabbi. So he sits down with the rabbi, thought he'd humor him, listen to him. They're talking, they're chatting. And in the middle of the chat, suddenly Rabbi Feller is looking out the window. He sees it's getting dark. He gets up, takes a string out of his pocket. He wraps it around his waist, and he goes off to the window and he starts shaking. Now, Velvel Green, who at the time was sitting in as the Reform rabbi of his local Reform community, because they didn't have one, he knew that rabbis get up, they announce page numbers, but here this guy gets up, he starts shaking in the middle of a meeting. He waited so long to get this meeting. Velvel Green moved a lot to be able to create this meeting, and he was very annoyed by what was happening. And finally, the rabbi finishes. He sits down. Velvel Green had no idea what happened, and he says, "Rabbi, you can leave. Get out of my office. This was so rude of you, so inappropriate. I don't want you here." And Rabbi looks at him puzzled, and he says, "Look, you told me you had something very important to meet with me about. In the middle of the meeting, you get up and just walk off and ignore me and start swaying." So the rabbi says, "What I came to meet with you about was very important indeed, but what I had to do was even more important. I had to pray. That was even more important." That first initial interaction set off a relationship that then eventually ends with Velvel Green with a very big beard himself in his own right. But that moment where he recognized that there's something that can't be bought, there's something that's even more important, a priority, a connection with God that's even more important, that regardless of what's going on, you have that moral clarity to be able to stop what you're doing and make that connection. That was something that was very moving and powerful for him. So we see this is the idea of mincha, the idea that Yitzchak gets from his mother, that even in the darkness, even in a time maybe where there's a little confusion, to be able to stop, to be able to focus on what's truly important, what's truly valuable, what's truly eternal, that's something that we're seeing story after story coming out of Israel from our brothers and sisters there that have been showing such clarity and focus in unspeakable tragedy, horror, and grief. And we all have that within us, we inherited from our matriarch Sarah, and let's tap into that and exercise it and express it more freely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Levi.